The wind tore across the hills like a blade, and Duke Alistair Renfrew pulled his horse to a sudden stop when he saw something pale lying in the snow ahead. His heart pounded. A woman, motionless. Her wedding gown was torn and soaked, and her lips had turned blue from the cold. He jumped down and rushed to her side, pressing his fingers to her neck, praying for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. Without a second thought, he lifted her onto his horse and rode hard toward his manor, the storm howling behind them as if trying to pull her back into the dark. By the time they reached the house, the woman was barely breathing. Servants rushed to bring blankets and warm water while Alistair carried her inside himself, refusing to let anyone else touch her. He sat beside her bed through the night, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering who she was and why she had been left to die alone in the snow. When she finally opened her eyes near dawn, she flinched at the sight of him, her body tensing as though she expected to be struck. "You are safe here," Alistair said gently. "No one will hurt you." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for a lie, but found none. Slowly, her shoulders relaxed. She whispered that her name was Seraphine, and then she said nothing more. Alistair did not press her. He ordered warm food brought to her room and told his staff to speak of her to no one outside the house. There was something about her silence that troubled him more than any scream could have. It was the silence of someone who had been running from more than just the cold. Over the next 2 days, Seraphine grew stronger, though she remained cautious, watching the door as if someone might burst through it at any moment. Alistair found himself drawn to her in a way he could not explain. She had a sharp mind and a quiet strength that reminded him of no one he had ever met. He brought her books from his library and sat with her by the fire, and slowly she began to speak more freely, though she still avoided one subject entirely, the wedding gown she had been found wearing. On the third night, a servant rushed into the hall, breathless, saying that riders had been seen searching the northern road, asking villagers if they had seen a runaway bride. Alistair felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He returned to Seraphine's room and found her standing at the window, her hands trembling against the frame. "They are looking for me," she said, before he could even ask. "Who is looking for you?" Alistair asked, though some part of him already feared the answer. Seraphine turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "The man I was supposed to marry," she said, "Lord Voss." The name struck Alistair like a fist to the chest. House Voss had been his family's enemy for 2 generations, bound by old grudges and broken promises. And now the very woman he had saved, the woman who had begun to matter to him more than he wanted to admit, was the bride of the man he despised most in the world. Outside, the wind screamed against the windows, and somewhere beyond the hills, riders were closing in. Seraphine's confession hung in the air like smoke that would not clear. Alistair stared at her, his jaw tight, his mind racing through the history between their 2 families. Land disputes, broken treaties, a cousin lost in a duel decades ago that neither side had ever forgiven. And now, standing before him, was the one person who could either end that feud or set it ablaze all over again. "Why did you run?" he finally asked, his voice low. Seraphine wrapped her arms around herself, as if bracing against a wind only she could feel. "Because he does not see me as a person," she said. "He sees me as a signature on a treaty, a way to end a war between our families without ever asking what I wanted." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "I was raised to be quiet, to be agreeable, to be given away like a piece of land. I could not do it. I would rather freeze in the snow than spend my life beside a man who looks through me instead of at me." Alistair said nothing for a long moment. He understood duty better than most men alive. His entire life had been shaped by obligations he never chose. But he also understood, for the first time, how it felt to hear someone speak of that same duty as a cage rather than a calling. Something in her honesty cracked open a part of him he had kept locked away since his father's death. "You will stay here," he said finally. "No one will force you back." Relief washed over Seraphine's face, followed quickly by worry. "If Lord Voss learns you are hiding me, it will not stay a private matter. It will become a reason for war. Alistair knew she was right. Sheltering her was no small act of kindness. It was a declaration whether he intended it or not. Word would spread. Lord Voss would see it as an insult, a theft, a challenge to his pride. And pride, Alistair knew from bitter experience, was the most dangerous weapon either family owned. Still, he found he could not bring himself to regret his choice. Over the following days, he and Seraphine spent more time together, and the walls between them began to fall away. She told him about her childhood, about a mother who died young and a father who valued alliances over affection. He told her about the weight of a title he never asked for, and the loneliness that came with commanding a household but belonging to no one. In each other, they found something rare, a person who listened without calculating what they might gain from it. But peace never lasts long when powerful men feel humiliated. Late one evening, a rider arrived at the gates, breathless and pale, warning that Lord Voss had learned where his missing bride was hiding. He was gathering men. He intended to march on Renfrew land within days, not for war exactly, but with enough force to make refusal impossible. Alistair stood in the courtyard as the messenger's words settled over him like the first snow of a colder winter. He looked back toward the house, toward the window where Seraphine stood watching, her hand pressed against the glass. Whatever came next, he realized, would not simply be about land or pride anymore. It would be about who she chose to stand beside, and what he was willing to risk to make sure that choice remained truly hers. Within 2 days, the fields beyond Renfrew Manor filled with the sound of approaching horses. Alistair watched from the highest window as a line of riders crested the hill, banners snapping in the wind, Lord Voss at their head. His stomach tightened, but he did not look away. He had made his choice the night he carried Seraphine in from the snow, and he would not abandon it now out of fear. He met Voss at the front gates, alone, refusing the guards who wanted to stand beside him. Lord Voss dismounted slowly, his expression carved from stone, his eyes burning with a fury that had clearly been building for days. "You have taken what belongs to me," Voss said, his voice carrying across the open yard. "She belongs to no one," Alistair replied evenly. "She ran because she chose to. I only kept her from freezing to death on the road." Voss's hand curled into a fist at his side, but he did not move closer. Behind Alistair, the manor doors opened, and Seraphine stepped out into the cold, her chin lifted despite the fear visible in her eyes. Voss's gaze snapped to her immediately. "Seraphine," he said, softer now, though the anger had not fully left his voice. "Come home. This ends now quietly, and no one need suffer for your foolishness." "I am not foolish for wanting a life of my own choosing," Seraphine said, her voice steady despite the tremble Alistair could see in her hands. "I will not marry a man who sees me as a solution to a problem instead of a person he could love." For a long moment, no one moved. The two families' guards watched from a distance, waiting for a signal that could mean peace or bloodshed. Alistair stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Seraphine, though he kept his hands open and visible, a sign that he had not come to fight. "There is another way to end this," Alistair said. "Not through a forced marriage, and not through a battle that will cost both our families more than either of us can afford. Let us speak as equals about a peace that does not require anyone's suffering." Voss studied him for a long, tense moment. Pride warred visibly across his face, but beneath it, Alistair could see something else: exhaustion. Years of feuding had worn on Voss as much as anyone. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Voss gave a single, sharp nod. "Speak then," he said, "but know this: if your words are empty, there will be no more chances for peace." Alistair felt the tension in his chest ease, just slightly. It was not victory, not yet, but it was a door left open where before there had only been a wall. Beside him, Seraphine exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding for days, and for the first time since the storm that had brought them together, hope felt like something within reach rather than something lost in the snow. Inside the great hall, Alistair, Voss, and Seraphine sat together for the first time, with only a handful of trusted advisors present to witness the conversation that would decide the future of two families. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence while each side waited to see who would speak first. Alistair began carefully, laying out a proposal he had spent the previous night preparing. Instead of a marriage built on obligation, he suggested a formal agreement between the two houses, one that addressed the old land disputes directly and fairly, without using any person as a bargaining piece. Trade routes would be shared. Disputed borders would be resettled by neutral surveyors rather than old grudges. It was not a romantic solution, but it was an honest one. Voss listened in silence, his fingers tapping slowly against the arm of his chair. When Alistair finished, Voss turned his attention to Seraphine, studying her as though seeing her clearly for the first time. "You truly do not wish to marry me," he said, not as an accusation, but as a realization finally settling into place. "I did not run because of hatred," Seraphine answered honestly. "I ran because I was never asked. My whole life, decisions were made for me as though my voice did not matter. I only wanted the chance to matter." Something shifted in Voss's expression, the anger draining slowly into something quieter, something closer to regret. He looked down at his hands, then back at Alistair. "My father built our feud on pride," he admitted. "I have spent my whole life continuing it without ever asking if it was worth continuing." The room remained silent for a long moment, the weight of generations pressing down on all of them. Then, finally, Voss extended his hand toward Alistair, not in friendship exactly, but in something equally important: respect. "I will agree to your terms," Voss said. "Not because I am forced to, but because I am tired of a war that has cost both our families too much for too long." Alistair shook his hand firmly, feeling the old weight of generations of conflict begin to lift, just slightly, from his shoulders. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was real, built on honesty rather than fear. As Voss prepared to leave, he paused before Seraphine one final time. "I hope you find the life you were searching for," he said quietly, and for the first time his words held no bitterness at all. When his men rode away into the fatting light, Alistair turned to Seraphine, who stood watching the horizon with tears gathering in her eyes, though her expression was full of relief rather than sorrow. The feud that had shaped both their lives was finally beginning to heal, not through force, but through choice. Months later, under a clear winter sky far gentler than the storm that had first brought them together, Alistair and Seraphine stood before their closest friends and family, exchanging vows built on genuine love rather than obligation. The two houses that had once stood as enemies now stood together, united not by treaties alone, but by two people who had chosen each other freely. And as snow began to fall softly around them once more, it no longer felt like danger. It felt like a new beginning.